Welcome, dear traveler, to Medieval Sleep Tales, your sanctuary of warmth, wonder, and gentle escape into history's quieter moments. Tonight, we invite you to leave behind the noise and haste of the modern world, to step through the mist of centuries, and discover a tale that speaks to the soul's deepest longing for peace. Our story is called The Castaway's Peace, a medieval island tale, and it carries you across storm-tossed seas to a distant shore where a merchant named Edmund finds not the tragedy of isolation, but the unexpected gift of tranquility. This is a journey about the resilience of the human spirit, the comfort found in simple work, and the profound beauty that emerges when life is stripped down to its most essential joys. So settle into your pillows, let your breathing slow and deepen, and allow these words to be your companion into restful sleep or peaceful contemplation. Whether you're drifting toward dreams or journeying through the quiet hours of night, you are welcome here. Let us begin, as the autumn winds of 1347 carry a merchant ship toward waters unknown and into a story of survival, simplicity, and unexpected grace. Part 1. The Storm and the Shore. The merchant vessel St. Catherine had been 7 weeks at sea when the storm found her, somewhere in the vast waters west of Portugal, bound for the trading ports of Flanders with a hold full of Castilian wool, barrels of sweet Malaga wine, and carefully wrapped bolts of silk that had traveled all the way from distant Cathay along roads Edmund could scarcely imagine. He stood at the rail in the gray light of early morning, watching clouds gather like dark fleece on the horizon, and felt the first whisper of unease stir in his belly, that ancient instinct that had kept his ancestors alive through countless generations, the small voice that says, "Take shelter, find safety, prepare." Edmund of York was 32 years old that autumn, a wool merchant of modest means and careful habits, neither wealthy nor poor, neither bold nor timid. He had a wife named Margaret waiting in York, a stone house near the shambles with a good oak door and glazed windows that caught the morning light, 2 apprentices who minded his stall in the market, and a reputation for fair dealing that had taken him 15 years to build. This was his 3rd voyage to the Iberian ports, and each time he made the journey, Margaret would kiss his forehead at the door, press a small wooden cross into his palm, and whisper the same blessing. "May St. Christopher guard your path, and may you return to me before the first snow." He had promised her he would be home by Martinmas, in time to salt the winter pig and share the feast with their neighbors. But the sea, as every sailor knows, keeps no promises and honors no calendars. The wind that had filled their sails so pleasantly for 6 weeks began to shift and strengthen, carrying with it the smell of distant rain and something else, something electric and alive. A charge in the air that made the ship's ropes hum and the gulls wheel away toward distant shores. The captain, a weathered Genoese named Matteo, who had sailed these waters for 30 years, ordered the sails reefed and sent men scrambling up the rigging to secure loose cargo. Edmund helped where he could, his merchant's hands awkward with sailors' knots, but willing and strong. Around him, the crew worked with the practiced efficiency of men who understood that the ocean could be both highway and grave, generous provider and merciless destroyer. By midday, the storm was upon them. Rain swept across the deck in horizontal sheets, cold as winter stones, and the waves that had been merely large grew into mountains of moving water, green-gray and terrible, lifting the St. Catherine high on their crests before dropping her into troughs so deep that the sky disappeared behind walls of churning sea. Edmund clung to a rope near the mainmast, soaked through, his fine wool cloak heavy as chainmail, his leather boots slipping on the tilting deck. He prayed not the formal Latin prayers of his childhood, but desperate, simple pleas. God have mercy. Holy Mary protect us. St. Christopher guide us to shore. Around him, sailors shouted orders that were torn away by the wind, and the ship groaned and creaked like a living thing in pain, her timbers straining against forces no human craft was meant to withstand. The mast snapped first a sound like thunder, a great crack that Edmund felt in his chest, and suddenly the mainsail was a chaos of canvas and rope whipping through the air, and men were screaming, and someone was bleeding, and the captain was roaring orders that nobody could hear over the wind's howl. Then came the grinding, shuddering impact as the ship struck something beneath the water reef. A rock, some hidden danger lurking in the storm-dark sea. The deck tilted violently, and Edmund lost his grip, sliding across wet planks until he crashed into the rail with force that drove the breath from his lungs. Water poured over the side, cold enough to stop the heart, and he understood with terrible clarity that the St. Catherine was dying, that she would sink, that he was going to drown far from home, and Margaret would wait by the window through the first snow and the second, and into the deep winter, not knowing, just waiting. He doesn't remember going into the water. There is only the memory of cold so profound it seemed to earn in darkness, and tumbling, and his lungs screaming for air he couldn't find. His heavy cloak dragged him down, and he fought with numb fingers to unbuckle it, to shed the weight that would carry him to the bottom. Something struck his head, a piece of floating debris, and the world went white with pain, and then gray, and then nothing at all. He woke to the sound of gulls and the feeling of sand beneath his cheek. For a long time he simply lay there, unable to move, unable to think beyond the immediate sensations. Warmth of sun on his back, the gentle push and pull of small waves around his legs, the gritty texture of beach against his palms. His body was one great ache. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, and his throat was raw with salt water. But he was breathing. He was breathing, and that meant he was alive. And that simple fact seemed so improbable, so miraculous, that for a moment he could only lie there and marvel at the steady rise and fall of his own chest. When he finally opened his eyes, the light was golden late afternoon. He thought, judging by the angle of the sun. He was lying on a beach of pale sand that stretched in both directions, backed by dense green vegetation that he couldn't quite identify. Palm trees, perhaps, though he had only seen such things in illuminated manuscripts. The water before him was a blue so clear and bright, it seemed unreal, nothing like the gray-green North Sea or even the darker Atlantic he had been sailing. This water was the color of stained glass in a cathedral window, translucent and jewel-like, lapping gently at the shore as if the storm that had destroyed his ship had never happened at all. He sat up slowly, testing his limbs. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. His clothes were in tatters, his fine merchant's tunic torn and stained with salt, his leather belt gone, his boots somehow still on his feet, though one had lost its buckle. Around him on the beach lay scattered debris from the wreck, a broken barrel stave, a coil of rope, a single oar, and further down the sand, the bodies of 3 sailors he recognized, lying still and gray, already being visited by crabs. Edmund pushed himself to his feet, swaying, and made his way to them, hoping against hope to find life, but the sea had taken them. He stood over their bodies for a long moment, committing their faces to memory young Thomas from Cornwall, old Pietro, who had taught him to splice rope, and the ship's boy, whose name he had never learned. Then he began the hard work of dragging them above the tide line, finding stones to weight them down, saying what prayers he could remember. It was humble, insufficient, but it was something. It was what decent men did for their dead. When the burying was done and rough cairns marked the place, Edmund turned to survey his situation with the practical mind that had made him a successful merchant. He was alive but alone, shipwrecked on an unknown shore with no tools, no provisions, no way to signal for rescue. The sensible part of him understood that he might very well die here, of hunger or thirst or exposure or any of 100 dangers he couldn't yet see. But another part of him, the part that had survived the storm, that had dragged itself from drowning sea to living shore, that part simply noted what needed to be done next. Find fresh water. Find shelter. Find food. Take each task as it came, one after another, like crossing a river on stepping stones. Don't look at the far shore. Just take the next step. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Edmund knew that tropical nights could fall quickly. He gathered what useful items he could find on the beach: the rope, the oar, a piece of canvas that might serve as a blanket, a cork float, a wooden pail with a crack in it, but still usable, and carried them to the edge of the vegetation. There, where sand met the shade of unfamiliar trees, he found a natural hollow between two large rocks, partially sheltered by overhanging branches. It would do for tonight. It would have to do. As darkness fell and strange bird calls echoed from the forest, Edmund sat in his makeshift shelter, wrapped in damp canvas, and allowed himself to think of home for the first time since the storm. Margaret would be spinning by the fire now, or perhaps mending his spare tunic, waiting for word of his return. The apprentices would have closed the shop and gone to their own homes, and the streets of York would be settling into evening. The curfew bell ringing from the minster tower, the watch calling out their rounds. It was a world away, impossibly, unbearably far, and he didn't know if he would ever see it again. The thought should have broken him, should have sent him into despair. But instead, sitting there in the warm darkness with the gentle sound of waves on sand, he felt something else. A strange, calm acceptance. He was alive. Whatever came next, he was alive, and that was enough for tonight. He slept fitly, waking often to unfamiliar sounds, but each time he woke, he found only peaceful darkness. The stars overhead brighter than any he had seen in the smoke-hazed skies of England. And eventually exhaustion claimed him properly and pulled him down into deep, dreamless rest. Morning came with the cry of seabirds and the warmth of sun on his face. Edmund rose stiff and sore, but clear-headed, and set about the first order of business, finding fresh water. He knew that a man could survive for weeks without food, but only days without water, and his throat was already parched from salt and sun. The island, for he could see, now that it was indeed an island, with the sea visible in all directions from the high points of the beach, seemed substantial, rising inland to a central hill covered in forest. Where there was elevation and vegetation, there was usually water. He followed a natural path that seemed to lead up from the beach, pushing through broad-leaved plants that released sweet scents when brushed, startling bright birds that flashed through the canopy like living jewels. The forest was nothing like the oak woods of England. Everything here was larger, lusher, more vibrant with life. Vines hung thick as ship's cables, flowers bloomed in improbable colors, and the air itself seemed to pulse with warm, humid vitality. It should have felt alien and frightening, but instead Edmund found it oddly comforting, as if the exuberance of life all around him was a promise. Life here, life abundant, life shared. He found the stream within an hour, a clear ribbon of water tumbling down moss-covered rocks, gathering in a pool before continuing its journey to the sea. Edmund knelt at the pool's edge and drank deeply, the water cool and sweet, tasting of stone and earth and green growing things. He drank until his belly was full, then splashed water on his face and the cut on his forehead, washing away dried blood and salt. Sitting back on his heels, he realized he was smiling, actually smiling, for the first time since the storm. Here was water, precious water, and it flowed abundantly, and he would not die of thirst. One problem solved. One step taken. The days that followed fell into a pattern born of necessity, but somehow peaceful in its simplicity. Each morning, Edmund would wake with the sun, make his way to the stream to drink and wash, then spend the daylight hours solving the next most pressing problem. He needed better shelter, so he gathered palm fronds and flexible branches, learning by trial and error how to weave them into walls, how to construct a frame that would shed rain, how to make a door that could be secured against whatever animals might wander in the night. His merchant's hands, used to handling wool and tallying accounts, became rough and capable, learning the satisfying work of building, of creating something from nothing but materials the island provided and the knowledge he slowly accumulated. He needed food, so he became a student of the island's offerings. There were coconuts, which took him 2 days, and several failed attempts to learn how to open properly. There were clusters of dates hanging high in certain palms, requiring careful climbing and courage to harvest. There were tidal pools full of shellfish oysters clinging to rocks, mussels in purple colonies, small crabs that could be caught and cooked over a fire he learned to make with patient friction and dried grass. There were fish in the shallows, which he learned to catch with a crude spear, fashioned from a straight branch sharpened with a rough stone. Not every attempt succeeded, but each failure taught him something, and gradually the island revealed its secrets to him, one meal at a time. He needed clothing, for his merchant's garments were falling apart. From pieces of salvaged canvas and woven palm fiber, he made a simple tunic and a hat to shade his face from the fierce tropical sun. He must have looked ridiculous. He thought, a respectable English merchant dressed like a primitive islander, and the thought made him laugh aloud, the sound strange in the quietness of his solitary life. But there was no one to see, no one to judge, and the clothes served their purpose. That was enough. The loneliness he had expected would be the hardest part. But as weeks passed, and he settled into the rhythms of island life, Edmund discovered something unexpected. Solitude was not the same as loneliness. In York, he had been surrounded by people constantly customers at his stall, apprentices asking questions, neighbors stopping to gossip, Margaret wanting to discuss household matters, the constant press and noise of city life. Here, there was silence, yes, but it was a full silence, rich with the sounds of wind in palm fronds, waves on sand, birds calling, insects singing their evening chorus. He was alone but not lonely, because the island itself became a kind of companion, revealing new aspects of itself each day, teaching him, challenging him, sustaining him. He began to notice things he had never had time to notice before. The way light changed throughout the day, painting the water a dozen different shades of blue and green and gold. The patterns of clouds and how they predicted weather. The regular arrival of certain birds at certain times, the cycles of the tide, the phases of the moon reflected in the midnight sea. Time, which had once been measured by church bells and market days and the demands of business, now flowed according to older rhythms: sunrise and sunset, hunger and satiation, work and rest. It was simpler, slower, and Edmund found to his surprise that he didn't miss the hurry and complication of his former life as much as he had expected. His shelter grew from a crude lean-to to a proper hut with walls, a roof that shed rain completely, and a raised sleeping platform that kept him off the damp ground. He dug a fire pit lined with stones, built a rack for drying fish, constructed a rough table and stool. Each improvement brought satisfaction that was deeper and more lasting than any successful trade deal had ever provided. This was the work of his own hands, created to meet his own needs, and there was something profoundly right about it, something that connected him to every ancestor who had ever built shelter, ever made a home from wilderness. One morning, perhaps 6 weeks after the shipwreck, he had taken to marking days with notches on a stick. Edmund climbed to the highest point of the island to survey his domain. From this vantage, he could see the entire island laid out below him like an illuminated map. The white curve of beaches, the dense green of forest, the darker green of swamp areas he had learned to avoid, the bright blue lagoon on the island's eastern side. In the distance, the sea stretched to every horizon, empty of ships, empty of any sign of the world he had come from. He knew he should feel despair at this isolation, should feel the weight of being cut off from everything and everyone he had known. but instead, looking out over the island that had sustained him, that had revealed its gifts so generously, he felt something closer to gratitude. The thought came to him unbidden. Perhaps this is not a tragedy. Perhaps this is a gift. He tested the thought carefully, as he would test the strength of a new rope. His old life had been good. He didn't deny that. He had loved Margaret, had taken pride in his work, had enjoyed the respect of his community. But it had also been constrained, predictable, governed by 1,000 small rules and expectations. Wake, work, eat, sleep, go to church, pay taxes, mind your manners, know your place. Here, there was no place to know except the place he created. No rules except the simple imperatives of survival. No expectations except those he set for himself. There was a freedom in that, a spaciousness he had never experienced before, and it frightened him a little even as it exhilarated him. As autumn deepened, or what passed for autumn in this place, where seasons seemed to blur and merge, Edmund's life took on a quality that was almost meditative. His days were full, but not frantic, busy, but not hurried. Each task had its time: morning for fishing when the water was calm, midday for projects in the shade when the sun was too fierce, afternoon for gathering, evening for cooking and tending the fire. He kept his camp tidy, his tools organized, his routines regular. There was comfort in this order, this self-imposed structure that gave shape to days that might otherwise have felt shapeless. He talked to himself sometimes, and to God more often, his prayers becoming conversations rather than recitations. He thanked the Creator for each meal, each successful hunt, each day of health and strength. He prayed for Margaret, hoping she had found peace with his disappearance, hoping she had not grieved too long. He prayed for the souls of the sailors who had died, whose cairns he visited regularly, keeping them clear of vegetation, saying their names aloud so they would not be forgotten. He found that his faith, which had been a matter of habit and duty in his old life, had become something more immediate and personal here. When you lived close to the elements, close to the thin line between thriving and starving, God seemed closer too, present in every providential discovery, every narrow escape from danger, every day of grace. His body changed, became lean and hard and brown from the sun. His mind changed too, becoming quieter, less cluttered with worry and calculation. He had no accounts to balance, no markets to anticipate, no competition to outmaneuver. He had only the present moment and the simple, honest work of living. It should have made him dull, he thought. Instead, he felt more awake than he had in years, more attentive to the world, more capable of noticing beauty, the perfect spiral of a shell, the precise engineering of a bird's nest, the way evening light turned the sea to molten copper. And in this attention, this new capacity to simply be present with what was before him, Edmund discovered something he had been too busy to find in his old life: peace. Not the peace of having no problems. He had problems aplenty and dangers he dealt with daily. But a deeper peace, the peace of being exactly where he was, doing exactly what needed to be done, with no other place to be and no other self to pretend to be. It was the peace of simplicity, of sufficiency, of a life stripped down to its essential core. And it was. He realized with something like wonder, enough, more than enough. It was, in its own strange way, abundance. Part 2. The Turning of Seasons. The island had no winter in the way Edmund had known winter, no frost etching patterns on window glass, no snow muffling the world in white silence, no icy wind that cut through wool and leather to chill the bone. But it had its own cycles, its own subtle shifts that marked the turning of time. The rains came more frequently as the weeks passed, warm tropical downpours that drummed on his palm frond roof and filled his carefully constructed cisterns with fresh water. The wind changed direction, bringing different birds, different fish to the shallows. Certain fruits ripened and fell while others came into season. The island, he learned, was never static but always changing, always moving through rhythms that were ancient long before any human foot had touched these shores. Edmund marked the passage of time not by calendar or clock, but by these natural signs and by his own adaptation to them. He had been on the island for what he calculated to be 3 months when he made his first real tool. Not just a sharpened stick or a crude stone blade, but an actual axe painstakingly created from a piece of ship's metal he found, wedged in rocks near the wreck site. A hardwood handle he shaped and smoothed over many days, and bindings of woven fiber that held the pieces together with surprising strength. The moment he hefted that axe, feeling its balance, testing its edge against a branch that split cleanly, he felt a surge of pride that was entirely new to him. This was different from the satisfaction of a profitable trade. This was the pride of creation, of having transformed raw materials into something useful through nothing but his own effort and growing skill. With the axe, his world expanded. He could fell small trees now, could shape larger pieces of wood, could build more ambitiously. He constructed a proper door for his hut, with wooden hinges that actually swung smoothly. He made a bench where he could sit in the evenings, watching the sun set over the western sea. He built a raised platform near the fire where he could smoke fish and preserve them for days when weather or luck kept him from catching fresh food. Each project taught him something new, revealed capabilities he hadn't known he possessed. His hands, which had once been soft and suited only for handling bolts of cloth and counting coins, became the hands of a craftsman, scarred and calloused, but infinitely more capable. He thought often of the irony. In England, he had employed craftsmen, had paid carpenters and smiths and masons to create things he needed. He had respected their skills, but never imagined possessing them himself. That was not what merchants did. But here, with no one to hire and no coin to pay them with, he had been forced to become carpenter, smith, mason, farmer, fisherman, cook, and engineer all in one. And in that necessity, he had discovered abilities that had lain dormant his entire life, waiting for circumstances that would call them forth. It made him wonder how many other men lived their whole lives, never knowing what they were truly capable of, simply because their station never required them to find out. The garden was his greatest pride and his most challenging project. He had found several useful plants growing wild on the island, a type of yam that could be roasted, leafy greens that were edible if somewhat bitter, herbs that added flavor to his simple meals. But the idea of actually cultivating them, of creating a proper garden, seemed at first beyond his abilities. He knew nothing of farming beyond the vague understanding that seeds went in ground and plants came up. Yet something in him wanted to try, wanted to see if he could coax the earth to produce food, not just by lucky foraging, but by intentional husbandry. He chose a spot near his hut where the soil seemed rich and dark, where morning sun would reach, but afternoon shade would prevent scorching. With a sharpened stick, he had not yet figured out how to make a proper spade. He broke the ground, mixing in rotted vegetation and ash from his fire, following instincts he didn't know he had. He planted seeds carefully harvested from fruits and vegetables, pressing them into the soil with something like prayer. Then he waited, watering daily from his cistern, watching the bare earth with an attention he had never given to anything in his mercantile life. When the first green shoots appeared, pushing up through the dark soil, Edmund felt a joy so pure and uncomplicated it brought tears to his eyes. They were alive. The seeds had germinated, had responded to his care, and now they were growing. He tended them like precious things, clearing weeds, adjusting the spacing as he learned what each plant needed, marking which varieties thrived and which struggled. The garden became a living record of his learning, his mistakes and successes literally growing before his eyes. Some plants failed, the soil too sandy, the shade too deep, his watering too generous or too sparse. But others flourished, and within months he had a producing garden that supplemented his gathered and hunted food with reliable vegetables. The satisfaction he felt harvesting his first mature yam, pulling it from the earth he had prepared with his own hands, was profound in a way he struggled to articulate even in his own thoughts. This was food he had grown, not bought, not traded for, not provided by someone else's labor, but grown by his own planning and work and patience. When he cooked it that evening, roasted in the coals with herbs from his garden and a fish from his weaving trap, the meal tasted like the finest feast he had ever attended in York, not because the food itself was exceptional, but because every element of it represented his own competence, his own relationship with this place that sustained him. As the months passed 4, then 5, then 6, Edmund developed a deeper understanding of the island's geography and resources. He had explored every beach, climbed every hill, waded through every accessible marsh. He knew where the best fishing was at different times of day, where particular fruits grew, where fresh water could be found. He had names for different areas, names that made sense to no one but himself. The Turtle Beach, where sea turtles came to lay eggs. The 3 Palms, where 3 ancient palm trees formed a natural landmark. The Dark Pool, where the stream formed a deep swimming hole under overhanging rocks, perfect for bathing in the heat of afternoon. He had also developed a sense of the island's moods and dangers. There were places to avoid when storms threatened, high ground that stayed dry when others flooded. There were plants that irritated the skin, and others that could be used to soothe the irritation. There were harmless snakes and ones to be wary of. There were currents in the lagoon that could sweep even a strong swimmer out to sea. The island was not malicious nature, had no such intentions, but it was powerful and indifferent, and survival meant learning to read its signs and respect its limits. One particular danger he learned through near tragedy. He had been fishing from rocks on the northern point, a favorite spot where deep water allowed large fish to come close to shore. The sea that day was calm, barely a ripple disturbing its glassy surface, and he was focused on his line, watching for the telltale tug of a bite. He didn't notice the water drawing back from the rocks, didn't see the wave building on the horizon until it was nearly upon him, not impossibly large, but large enough. A sudden swell that crashed over the rocks with force that knocked him down and swept him into the churning water. For a terrifying moment, he was tumbling again, just like during the shipwreck, unable to tell up from down, his lungs burning, his mind screaming that he had survived the storm only to die in calm waters through his own carelessness. But some instinct made him stop fighting, stop thrashing, and simply let the current carry him. And as it carried him, it also lifted him, brought him back to the surface gasping and coughing but alive. He swam for shore with every ounce of strength, dragged himself onto the sand, and lay there trembling, humbled by how quickly the peaceful sea could turn deadly. How thin the margin was between life and death, even after months of successful survival. That night, as he sat by his fire, nursing bruises and a deep respect for the ocean's power, Edmund realized that he had grown perhaps too comfortable, too confident in his mastery of this place. The island had been generous with him, but it was not tame, not safe, not conquered. He was a guest here, tolerated but not protected, and his survival depended on maintaining vigilance, on never forgetting that nature's mercy was not guaranteed. It was a humbling lesson, but a valuable one, and it made him more careful, more thoughtful in all his activities from that day forward. The spiritual dimension of his solitary life deepened as well. In York, Edmund had been a conventional Christian, attending Mass dutifully, observing the holy days, supporting the parish with his tithes. His faith had been real, but largely unexamined, a matter of habit and social expectation as much as personal conviction. Here, with no church to attend, no priest to hear confession, no community to worship with, his relationship with God became something more direct, more personal, almost conversational. He created a small chapel of sorts, nothing grand, just a cleared space near his hut with a rough wooden cross he had fashioned from driftwood, smooth and silvered by salt and sun. Each morning and evening, he would kneel there and pray, not the formal Latin prayers of his youth, but simple conversations with the Creator. He gave thanks for his survival, for each day of health, for the abundance the island provided. He prayed for Margaret, imagining her in their stone house in York, and hoped that she had found peace, perhaps even remarried, moved on with her life. He prayed for the souls of the dead sailors, whose names he recited like a litany so they would not be forgotten. And increasingly, he prayed prayers of simple wonder and gratitude, awed by the beauty and complexity of the creation around him. The island became his cathedral. The rustling of palm fronds was his choir, the waves his organ music, the sunset his stained glass. He found himself seeing the divine in everything, in the perfect spiral of a nautilus shell, in the fierce devotion of a bird defending its nest, in the way a seed contained within itself the entire blueprint of the plant it would become. These were not new theological insights, he knew. Monks and mystics had been preaching about seeing God in nature for centuries. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it directly were entirely different things. And here, with nothing between him and the raw fact of creation, he experienced it in ways that humbled and exalted him simultaneously. He began keeping a kind of journal, though he had no proper writing materials. Instead, he carved marks into a large flat stone near his hut, simple pictographs that recorded significant events. A particularly large fish caught, the day he completed his door, the first harvest from his garden, the night he saw shooting stars so numerous they seemed like celestial rain. These carvings became a record of his life here, a testament to his existence that would outlast him if he died, proof that Edmund of York had lived on this island and had made something of his time here, however humble. 7 months into his island life, as he tallied by his notched stick, Edmund experienced something he had not felt in longer than he could remember: contentment. Not happiness exactly, he still missed home, still felt the occasional pang of loneliness, still worried about Margaret, and wondered if he would ever see civilization again. But beneath those surface concerns was a deep current of contentment, a sense that his life here, for all its simplicity and hardship, was somehow right. He was doing meaningful work, the work of survival, yes, but also the work of creation and stewardship. He was living in harmony with his environment rather than in opposition to it. He was discovering capabilities he had never known he possessed. And in the process, he was becoming someone he liked rather more than the busy, anxious merchant he had been. The realization came to him one evening as he sat on his bench, watching the sun set over the Western Ocean, eating a simple meal of fish and yams and greens from his garden. This was enough. This life, stripped of ambition and acquisition, reduced to the basic elements of eating and sleeping and working and contemplating, was somehow fuller than the cluttered, complicated life he had left behind. He didn't need fine clothes or a stone house or the respect of the guild to be satisfied. He needed food, shelter, meaningful work, and moments of beauty, and all of those things the island provided in abundance. That night, under stars so bright they cast shadows, Edmund made a decision that surprised him. If a ship came tomorrow and offered him passage back to England, back to Margaret and York and his old life, he wasn't certain he would take it. The thought should have shocked him, should have seemed like madness or betrayal, but instead, it felt like truth. He had found something here, something precious and rare as simplicity, a peace, a direct engagement with life, unmediated by social conventions and economic necessities. And he was not eager to give it up, not even for the comforts of civilization. The seasons continued their subtle shifts. The rains grew heavier, came more frequently, transforming the island into an even lusher version of itself. Streams ran fuller, the vegetation exploded with new growth, and Edmund's garden flourished. He built channels to direct rainwater, improved his cisterns, created a covered area where he could work on projects when the sky opened up. The rain, rather than being an impediment, became another gift, another aspect of the island's generosity that he learned to appreciate and work with rather than against. He began experimenting with preservation and storage, preparing for future lean times that might come. He smoked fish until they were hard and dry, stored in woven baskets suspended from his roof to keep them away from insects and small animals. He dried fruits in the sun, wrapped in cloth salvaged from the wreck. He learned to ferment certain vegetables in salt water, creating stores that would last for months. These were ancient skills, practiced by every culture that had ever faced seasonal scarcity, and Edmund felt a connection to that long human story of provision and foresight, of planning for tomorrow while living in today. His body continued to adapt and change. He was lean now, almost gaunt by the standards of well-fed merchants, but stronger than he had ever been. He could swim for hours without tiring, could climb trees with the agility of a boy, could hike across the entire island without breaking hard breath. His skin was deeply tanned, his hair had grown long and lightened by the sun, and his beard, which he kept trimmed with a sharp shell because he was not ready to abandon all civilization, was shot through with threads of gray he had never noticed before. He barely recognized himself when he caught his reflection in the still water of the dark pool. This lean, sun-darkened, competent man seemed a stranger, someone who bore only superficial resemblance to Edmund of York, wool merchant, respectable burgher, keeper of accounts. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps he was not that person anymore. Perhaps the storm had not just transported him to a different place, but had given him the opportunity to become a different person, to discover who he might have been if circumstances had been different, if life had taken another path. And the person he was becoming, this castaway who built and grew and fished and prayed, who found satisfaction in simple competence and beauty and simplicity, this person, he realized, was someone he was coming to respect, even to admire. As his 9th month on the island approached, Edmund realized that he had stopped counting the days quite so obsessively. The notched stick remained, and he still marked each passing day out of habit, but the urgency had gone out of it. Time had become less linear, less a march towards some future goal, and more cyclical, moving with the tides and seasons in patterns that repeated, and yet were never exactly the same. It was the rhythm of nature rather than the calendar of commerce, and he found it suited him far better than he ever would have imagined. He had routines now, comfortable patterns that gave structure to his days without constraining them. Morning fishing, midday work on projects, afternoon gathering or hunting, evening cooking and contemplation. Within that structure, there was room for spontaneity, for responding to the island's offerings as they arose. If the fish were biting unusually well, he might fish longer. If a particular fruit was ripening, he might spend the afternoon harvesting. If inspiration struck for a new tool or improvement to his shelter, he might devote days to its creation. The point was not rigid adherence to schedule, but rather a balanced approach that honored both consistency and flexibility. He had also developed small ceremonies and observances that marked the passing of time in meaningful ways. Each Sunday, or what he calculated to be Sunday, he rested from labor as much as possible, spending the day in prayer and reflection and simple enjoyment of the island's beauty. Each full moon, he would climb to the highest point and spend the night there, watching the moonlight silver the sea, feeling small and yet significant under the vast dome of stars. When he completed a major project or achieved a significant milestone, he would prepare a special meal, a small feast to celebrate, even though he was the only guest. These rituals, he realized, served an important purpose. They prevented the days from blurring together into undifferentiated sameness, gave shape and meaning to time's passage, reminded him that he was not just surviving but living, creating a life that had dignity and intention even in solitude. They were his answer to the question that must face every castaway: how to remain human, remain civilized, remain yourself when all the external structures that defined those things have been stripped away. And the answer, he found, was surprisingly simple. You chose to. Every day, you made the choice to maintain standards, to honor traditions, to find beauty and create meaning. No one was watching, No one would judge him if he let himself slip into mere animal existence. But he would know, and that was enough. The life he was building here might be simple, but it was not crude. It was, in its way, elegant, a life pared down to essentials, but those essentials honored and done well. As the 10th month began, Edmund stood at the threshold of his hut one morning and surveyed his small domain with eyes that saw it freshly, as if for the first time. The hut was solidly built, its palm frond roof tight and weatherproof, its door fitting snugly on wooden hinges. The garden flourished, neat rows of thriving plants. The fire pit was ringed with carefully placed stones, with racks for smoking fish and a grill for roasting. Tools hung in their proper places, each one created by his hands and used with respect. The small chapel stood serene in morning light, a testament to faith maintained in isolation. Everything was clean, organized, functional, and sufficient. This was a life. Not the life he had planned, not the life he had expected, but a life nonetheless, and a good one. He had not just survived the shipwreck. He had built something from its aftermath, had transformed disaster into opportunity, despair into contentment, isolation into a kind of communion with the natural world that fed his soul as surely as the island fed his body. The merchant Edmund would scarcely recognize this place, or the man who had created it. But the man he was becoming understood that this was perhaps the truest success he had ever achieved. Not wealth accumulated or status earned, but a life lived with intention, competence, gratitude, and peace. Part 3. The Gifts of Solitude. The island revealed itself in layers, like a manuscript whose margins contained secrets visible only to patient readers. Edmund had thought, in those first weeks, that he had learned the island's essentials, where to find water, what to eat, how to build shelter. But as his first year drew to a close, and then passed into memory, he discovered that knowing a place superficially and truly understanding it were vastly different things. The island had rhythms within rhythms, subtleties that only revealed themselves to someone who stayed still long enough to notice, who paid attention not just with the calculating eye of survival, but with the appreciative eye of genuine relationship. He learned, for instance, that certain fish came to the lagoon only when the moon was new, drawn by darkness and the particular tides that moonlessness brought. He learned that the hermit crabs would change shells in synchrony after storms, all of them seeming to decide simultaneously that their old homes were insufficient and new accommodations must be found. He learned that the wind carried different scents depending on which direction it blew: rain from the east, dry heat from the south, and from the west, very rarely, the faint smell of land that was not his island, some distant shore he would never see, but whose existence reminded him that the world beyond still turned. These observations, carefully noted and pondered, became a kind of natural philosophy, a personal science of island life. Edmund had no books to consult, no authorities to reference, only his own patient attention and a willingness to learn from what the island itself taught. And he found that this direct engagement with the world around him, unmediated by other people's expertise or written knowledge, had its own deep satisfaction. Every discovery was his own, earned through observation and experimentation, and therefore precious in a way that borrowed knowledge could never be. The garden, by his second year, had expanded considerably. What had begun as a small experimental plot had grown into a proper cultivated area, with different sections for different crops. He had learned through trial and error which plants thrived in sun and which preferred shade, which needed frequent watering, and which could tolerate drought, which grew well together, and which competed. The garden had become a living laboratory where he tested ideas, learned from failures, and gradually accumulated practical wisdom that would have made any English farm wife nod with approval. But more than just a source of food, the garden had become a meditation, a practice that taught him patience and humility. You could not rush a seed into growing. You could not force a plant to produce before its time. You could only prepare the ground, provide what care you could, and then wait, trusting in processes that were older than humanity and wiser than any individual understanding. There was something deeply spiritual in this. Edmund found this surrender to natural timing, this acceptance that growth happened in its own season and could not be hurried by anxiety or desire. He had also learned to preserve and prepare food in ways that would have seemed impossible to his former merchant self. The smoking rack was in constant use, preserving fish and occasionally the small game he caught in snares. He had discovered how to make a rough salt by evaporating seawater in shallow stone basins, and this salt transformed his ability to preserve food and add flavor to his simple meals. He had learned to wrap certain foods in leaves before burying them in coals, creating slow-cooked meals that were tender and flavorful. He had even figured out a method for making a kind of rough flour from grinding dried yams, which when mixed with water and cooked on hot stones, produced a flatbread that reminded him, however faintly, of the hearth loaves Margaret used to bake. Each meal, no matter how simple, was prepared with care and eaten with gratitude. This too had become a spiritual practice, a way of honoring the gifts the island provided. He would set his simple table, a flat piece of driftwood smoothed and cleaned, with the few implements he had crafted, and he would pause before eating to give thanks, to acknowledge that none of this was guaranteed, that each day of provision was grace. In York, meals had often been rushed affairs, eating while discussing business or planning the next day's activities. Here, eating was itself the activity, to be savored and appreciated, a communion with the sources of life. The solitude, which he had feared would crush him, had instead opened spaces in his mind and heart that he hadn't known existed. In the constant press of city life, there had never been true quiet, never been the kind of deep silence that allowed thoughts to settle and clarify. Here, in the long evenings by his fire or the peaceful afternoons resting in shade, his mind could wander freely, following chains of thought to their conclusions, examining memories with new perspective, asking questions that had no ready answers but were valuable for the asking. He thought often about what it meant to live well, to live rightly. In his merchant life, success had been measured in concrete terms: profits, property, reputation, the respect of peers. But what did success mean here, where there were no peers to impress and no wealth to accumulate beyond the daily provision of necessities? He had come to believe that success here meant something different: harmony with his environment, competence in his self-sufficiency, peace in his spirit, gratitude for each day's gifts. These were harder to measure than gold coins, but they seemed somehow more real, more substantial, more worth pursuing. He thought about happiness, and whether it was something that could be achieved or only something that arrived unexpectedly, a gift rather than a goal. He had been content in York, satisfied with his moderate success, comfortable in his routines. But had he been happy? Truly happy in the way that children were happy, or the way saints were said to be happy, with a joy that came from deep alignment between inner and outer life? He wasn't sure. But here, in moments of complete absorption in his work, or complete rest in his hammock, watching clouds drift across blue sky, he touched something that felt like happiness, simple, uncomplicated, requiring nothing more than what he already had. He thought about God and faith, and what it meant to live a religious life without the structure of church and clergy. He had discovered that faith, stripped of ritual and community and institutional authority, came down to very simple things: gratitude, wonder, humility, hope. He was grateful for his survival, for each day's provision. He felt wonder at the complexity and beauty of creation. He was humbled by his own smallness and dependence on forces beyond his control. And he hoped in what he wasn't entirely sure, but hope itself seemed to be a religious act, a refusal to despair, an affirmation that meaning and goodness were real, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. His prayers had evolved from formal petitions to something more like conversations with a presence he felt but could not see. He would speak aloud sometimes, sharing his thoughts and observations, asking questions that had no answers, expressing fears and hopes and gratitude. And in the silence that followed, in the gentle sound of waves and wind, he sometimes felt a response, not words, but a kind of peace that settled over him, a sense of being heard, of not being as alone as he appeared to be. Whether this was genuine divine communication or merely his own mind finding comfort in patterns of his own creation, he couldn't say. But it felt real, and it sustained him, and that seemed enough. The island's wildlife, which he had initially viewed purely in terms of threat or resource, had become a source of endless fascination and companionship. There were the sea turtles that came ashore each season to lay their eggs, ancient creatures that moved with slow dignity, whose tracks in the sand were like signatures of persistence and endurance. There were the bright parrots that gathered in certain trees, squabbling and chattering, their raucous calls, a kind of music. There were the hermit crabs that patrolled the beach like miniature sentinels, the octopuses that hunted in tidal pools with alien intelligence, the dolphins that sometimes played in the waves offshore, their acrobatic leaps, pure expressions of joy. He had developed particular fondness for a small family of ground doves that nested near his hut, their soft cooing a constant background to his daily activities. He didn't feed them. He had learned that encouraging wild animals too close was unwise, but he protected their nesting area, kept it clear of disturbance, and found genuine pleasure in watching the parents tend their chicks, teaching them to forage, to fly, to navigate the complex world of survival. When the young ones finally fledged and flew off on their own, Edmund felt a parental pride that surprised him, as if some nurturing instinct that had never found expression in his childless marriage had attached itself to these small birds, who had no idea they were being watched over. He had come to understand that the island was not an empty stage on which his solitary drama played out, but rather a community of life forms, all interconnected, all dependent on each other in ways both obvious and subtle. The plants fed the insects fed the birds spread seeds that became new plants. The dead leaves composted into soil. The soil nourished new growth. The growth provided shelter and food for countless creatures. He was part of this web, not separate from it. His garden depended on insects for pollination. His existence depended on fish and plants, and when he died, his body would feed the same soil that fed him. It was a cycle, ancient and perfect, and his time here had taught him to see himself not as master of nature, but as participant in it. One creature among many, all of us sustained by the same sun, the same rain, the same mysterious force that animated life itself. As his second year on the island progressed, Edmund found himself thinking less about rescue and more about what he would do if rescue came. The question was no longer, when will I be saved? But rather, do I want to be saved? The thought would have seemed like madness to his former self, but his former self had not known what this life had to teach. He had not known the satisfaction of complete self-reliance, the peace of simplicity, the joy of days measured not by profit and loss, but by work accomplished and beauty observed. If a ship appeared on the horizon tomorrow, offering passage back to England, what would he choose? Return to York, to a wife who might have mourned him and moved on, to a business that would have been claimed by creditors, to a life that would never again fit quite right after he had tasted this freedom, or stay here in this simple life he had built, growing old on this island, eventually dying here and being buried beside the sailors who had not survived the wreck? Neither choice was easy. Neither choice was without cost. But increasingly, Edmund found himself imagining the latter, found himself thinking that perhaps the storm had not taken his life, but rather given him a new one, better suited to who he truly was beneath the layers of social expectation and commercial ambition. He marked the second anniversary of the shipwreck with a day of reflection and gratitude. He had been on the island for 2 full cycles of seasons, 2 complete turns of whatever seasonal wheel this tropical place followed. He was not the same man who had washed up on this shore, half-drowned and desperate. That man had been competent in his limited sphere, but largely helpless outside it, dependent on the skills and services of others, defined by his role in society rather than by any inherent qualities. The man he had become was different, not necessarily better in any absolute sense, but certainly more capable, more complete, more integrated. He could provide for himself, protect himself, occupy himself, sustain himself in body and spirit. He had become, in a very real sense, sufficient unto himself, and there was a profound dignity in that. The isolation that he had initially feared had become something he valued, even cherished. The silence that had once seemed oppressive now felt like a luxury, a rare gift in a world that was elsewhere filled with noise and distraction. Here, he could hear himself think, could follow his thoughts to their conclusions without interruption, could simply be present with his own consciousness in a way that the busyness of civilized life had never permitted. He was learning who Edmund truly was when stripped of all the roles and expectations that society imposed, and he found that he liked this essential self, this person who emerged when all the overlay of social performance was removed. He had also learned something important about happiness and where it could be found. In York, he had believed that happiness came from favorable circumstances, success in business, comfortable home, good marriage, security. And those things had brought a kind of contentment. But here, where circumstances were objectively much harder, where he had none of the comforts of civilization, he found himself touching a deeper kind of happiness, one that wasn't dependent on external conditions, but arose from internal alignment. When his work was honest work, meeting real needs with competent effort, there was satisfaction. When his mind was clear and his body healthy, there was contentment. When he paused to notice beauty sunset, birdsong, the perfect architecture of a shell, there was joy. Happiness, he had learned, was not something to be achieved, but something to be accessed, not earned but received, always available to those who learn to be present and grateful. His body by now was as lean and hard as it would ever be, his movements efficient and sure, his senses sharp from constant use. He could identify fish by the pattern of their movement in water, could predict weather from the behavior of insects and birds, could judge the time of day by the angle of shadows and position of sun. These were ancient skills, older than civilization, and in learning them, he had connected to something primal, something that lived in every human but was buried under layers of modern living. He was, in a very real sense, more human here than he had been in civilization, more directly engaged with the basic realities of existence, more dependent on his own capabilities, more aware of his place in the natural order. He thought sometimes about future castaways who might find this place, wondered what they would make of the life he had built here. Would they see his hut, his garden, his tools, and understand what they represented? Would they recognize these as evidence, not of mere survival, but of a life intentionally crafted, a conscious choice to live with dignity and purpose even in isolation? He hoped so. He hoped that if he died here and years later, someone else washed up on this shore, they would find his small improvements and take heart, would know that a man had lived here once and lived well, and that they too could do the same. The island had taught him so much, had been such a patient and generous teacher. It had taught him self-reliance and humility, patience and gratitude, contentment and wonder. It had taught him that a good life didn't require wealth or status or even other people, though those things could certainly enrich existence. A good life required work that mattered, beauty to notice, challenges to overcome, and the wisdom to be grateful for what you had rather than yearning for what you didn't. These were lessons he could have learned in York, perhaps, but he hadn't. He had been too busy, too distracted, too caught up in the endless pursuit of more. Here, with nothing to pursue but his own survival and well-being, he had finally learned what mattered. As evening fell on this day of anniversary reflection, Edmund sat by his fire, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky like earthbound stars returning home. 2 years ago, He had been a moderately successful wool merchant, a man of no particular distinction, living a life that was comfortable but not especially meaningful, looking forward to decades more of the same pleasant routine until age or illness carried him off. Now he was a castaway, a man living on an unnamed island in unknown seas, possessing nothing but what he had built or gathered or caught, completely alone and yet somehow complete. If given the choice, truly given the choice with full understanding of what each option meant, which life would he choose? The comfortable prison of civilization or the challenging freedom of this island? The answer, he realized with something like wonder, was not as clear as it once would have been. Both lives had their gifts, their costs, their particular forms of richness and poverty. But this life, this simple, challenging, beautiful life, had given him something the other never had: the knowledge of who he truly was, stripped of all pretense and performance, reduced to essence. And that knowledge was worth more than any merchant's fortune, more precious than any worldly success. The fire burned low, the stars emerged in their multitudes, and Edmund sat in perfect stillness, listening to the eternal conversation of wind and wave, feeling himself part of something vast and ancient and good. He was alive, he was capable, he was at peace. Whatever tomorrow brought rescue or another day of island life, he would meet it with the competence and gratitude that this place had taught him. He was, in the deepest sense, exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do, being exactly who he needed to be. And in that realization, in that complete acceptance of what was, Edmund found not resignation but liberation, not defeat, but victory of a kind he had never imagined possible. The castaway had found what the merchant had been seeking all along, not wealth or status or even safety, but something far more precious, the peace that comes from living simply, honestly, gratefully, in harmony with the world and with oneself. That peace, once found, was a treasure beyond price, a gift that could never be taken away because it dwelled not in circumstances, but in the heart that had learned to receive each moment as sufficient, each day as grace, each breath as blessing. The island had saved him, not just from drowning, but from a kind of spiritual drowning, from a life lived on the surface, never diving deep. And for that salvation, Edmund gave thanks to God, to fate, to the generous earth that had sustained him, to the storm that had brought him here. All of it, the terror and the peace, the loss and the gain, the death of his old life and the birth of his new one, all of it was gift. All of it was grace. And so we come to the end of our journey with Edmund, the merchant who became a castaway, who found on a distant shore not tragedy but transformation, not loss but liberation. We have walked with him through storm and stillness, through fear and peace, through the learning of ancient skills and the discovery of timeless truths. His island became his teacher, his sanctuary, his home, a place where life was stripped to its essence and found to be not impoverished but abundantly rich. Thank you for spending this time with Medieval Sleep Tales, for allowing us to carry you away from the modern world into this gentle story of resilience and grace. If this tale brought you peace, we invite you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more cozy medieval journeys into history's quieter moments. Explore our other stories of castles and cottages, of hearth fires and harvest moons, of the simple souls who found meaning in everyday miracles. May your own journey, whether towards sleep or through the peaceful hours of night, be filled with the same tranquility that Edmund found on his island shore. Until next time, from Medieval Sleep Tales, sweet medieval dreams.